Welcome to Wednesday Live, everyone. So grateful that you're here with us. And tonight is a very special night because we've got Jennifer Green Godette that I get to share with everybody. I'm so excited to share her and hear from her wisdom tonight. Jennifer is a diversity and inclusion marketing leader at Cognizant. She leverages her extensive marketing experience by doing campaign management, digital marketing, strategic partnerships, executive events, and all kinds of ways to creatively share the truth and knowledge about diversity and inclusion and why that's so important for Cognizant and their clients and partners. Jennifer, thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Good, me too. So, an impetus, one of the many, to get the chance to talk to you tonight is that you recently wrote an article called Why Black People Need Allies Too. And I want to just start with, what was the inspiration for writing that article?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was George Floyd's murder, essentially. But basically, he was murdered. There were these protests going on. And for the first time, I started seeing, dialogue amongst colleagues that I worked with who, they'd said I never wanted to say anything about this before because it seemed too political, but I can't be silent anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
so that really kind of spurred me to action. We definitely at Cognizant had some things come out from our executives, some letters that came out talking about the situation, saying that violence, condemning violence, but saying we need to stand up for what's right.
Mm-hmm.
But at Cognizant, we had done a lot in support of the LGBTQ community, and I really felt we needed to step up and, do something to represent and support the Black community.
Yeah.
So that's really kind of what pushed me
Mm-hmm.
to work on the article.
Yeah, I really loved reading it at the time, and since then I've reread it because you also have some hyperlinks to other really important, useful information for those who read it, and we will include it in our follow-up notes. So for those of you who didn't already register, just make sure that somehow we get your contact information so that we can send you all the valuable follow-up notes. But one of them is the link to this article, Why Black People Need Allies Too. And you have all these hyperlinks related to other deaths that have taken place leading up to this. So George Floyd's death. I mean, what can you tell us about the catalyst or the why was George Floyd's murder such a call to action, unlike others, so many, unfortunately, others that have gone
You
before him?
know, I don't exactly know the answer to that. I think it has something to do with the fact that coronavirus had a lot of people stuck at home
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and maybe they had to watch TV, they're paying more attention. Because his definitely wasn't the first. We had just a few weeks prior, Ahmaud Arbery, who was jogging in his own neighborhood and killed by two Black men. We had Breonna Taylor, who was killed as well in her home, in her apartment. The police knocked on her. Actually, they didn't knock on her door. It was a no-knock
Mm-hmm.
warrant. So they
Mm-hmm.
just entered her apartment and started shooting. Um, so, his wasn't the first, but for some reason, people were paying attention and it's really spurred people to action. And, now we hear people saying Black Lives Matter, and it doesn't seem quite as controversial as it did, just a few months ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you're right. For whatever the reason, let's celebrate that it is more
Yes,
of a call to action. The amount of people protesting was testament to that, right? I mean, so despite the fact that
definitely.
here we are in a pandemic and everybody's told to stay safe at home, this was something that got people of all colors and backgrounds to come together and take action. And I remember you telling me that you just read something about this. What did
I
you?
did.
Yeah.
So actually, this morning, I read an article from the New York Times. It was actually published July 3rd. It's called Black Lives Matter, maybe the largest movement in US history. And in this article, they said that between 15 million and 26 million people protested in June, just around, kind of spurred on by the death of George Floyd. And they had some quotes from professors. One professor, Neil Caron from UNC, said that he's never seen people self-reporting protest participation like they have, for such a short period of time, like they did around this.
Yeah.
Another professor, Erica Chenoweth from Harvard, works with an organization called the Crowd Counting Consortium.
Mm-hmm.
And they collect data about crowd sizes at political protests. And she says that international protests that successfully overthrow governments typically require about 3.5% of the population at their peak. Yeah. And this has brought out 6 to 10% of the adult population. So hopefully we'll really start to see some changes as a result of this.
Yeah. The
other thing that I didn't realize is that Black Lives Matter is now 7 years old. Their anniversary was actually on July 13th, so just a couple days ago. Juneteenth. So it's been around for 7 years now.
July 13th.
Yes, July 13th.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So that's also really interesting to know. Yeah. And I think that, some of these images that we've had the chance to see really speak volumes about who's been coming out to protest, and then, even some heartwarming images like these where people are embracing each other and finding common ground in the fight. Right. And then this one I really like too, which is, an apology that he's late to the game, but, he's here now. Yeah. So I think that, the numbers of people and the range of activism is really encouraging. Right. Because, as we know, there's been countless names. I mean, here's just a blurry version of so many people that have gone before that, it's like beyond time. Yes. Yeah.
I did want to say, so Black Lives Matter, I think it is becoming less controversial, but there are still people who, if you say Black Lives Matter, they immediately say all lives matter.
Yep.
And, I think the way that I think about this is Black Lives Matter is really just saying, let's focus on the people that need the most assistance right now. And given what's going on in terms of racial inequality and specifically police brutality, that's why Black Lives Matter. All lives won't matter until Black Lives Matter. Or I have a friend who puts it another way. She's said, if you go to a rally, let's say, for instance, around breast cancer, you wouldn't hold up a sign that says, I support colon cancer.
Right.
Right now, we're all just trying to work to support Black lives.
That's right. Yeah. And if breast cancer is the cancer that was killing the most people and the most dominant, or the cancer that people weren't talking about enough, then we would really need to focus on that to galvanize people and make systemic change before we could really focus our attention. And I think that, the effort or the sentiment, like all lives matter or blue lives matter, like we understand that nobody's saying that they don't matter. But I agree with you. What we're saying is the lives that have not been treated equally and with respect need to matter at the very least equally, right? And I do think that there are some, challenges around understanding that. Like, for example, like I keep trying to ask myself, like, well, why wouldn't that make sense? And what is in the way? And, perhaps we're going to talk about some of that in our conversation tonight about systemic racism, because I think that, sometimes it's not obvious to people, and that could in part be because of privilege. And then, I'm not sure really what the big gap of understanding is, but I think if we can all get our heads around that Black Lives Matter and we need to seek equity and equality, then, we can all move ahead with strength.
I agree. I mean, I think that a lot of people, as you said, don't understand systemic racism. And so I kind of feel like someone reading my article might feel like the big issue is police brutality, and that is an issue. But to me, it's so much larger than that, and that's where systemic racism comes in. And the fact that certain people have privileges that others don't. One example that actually happened the same day of George Floyd's murder was the incident that happened in Central Park.
Right.
So a woman named Amy Cooper was walking her dog in an area that required dogs to be on a leash. She's a white woman. She didn't have her dog on a leash. A Black man whose name was Christian Cooper, he was there actually in this special space in the park that's reserved for bird watching.
Yeah.
So he was there, knew that anyone walking a dog should have a leash on, and there were signs. And he asked her to put a leash on her dog, and she refused and said, "I'm going to call the police." And he said, "Whatever, go ahead." But he started recording their interaction.
Yeah.
And you could see that she did call the police and said, "An African-American man is threatening me and my dog." And he had simply asked her to put a leash on her dog. It ended when, at the end of the call, she got off the call, she put a leash on her dog, and then, I think they went their separate ways. But she did end up losing her job, and she also ended up losing her dog, which she'd adopted. So there were definitely consequences for her. And I think most recently, they were trying to charge her with reporting a false crime. So.
Yeah. Right. Because she said that he was threatening her life.
Right.
Right. And so I remember hearing newscasters talk about that one in particular. Well, like a late night talk show host, Trevor Noah, who I love. But he was saying, like, those are words that Black people have learned translate to incarceration. Right. Even if it's a false claim. So thank God for cell phones. And
yes.
And I think when we get into talking about how to be an effective ally, we'll talk more about that. But, I saw this image recently that I think speaks volumes, which is this is the part of racism that's been captured on iPhones. And then here's racism, right? This massive, massive iceberg.
Right.
So thank God for video so that there's evidence of like what this actually sounded like, and it's not just a personal witness. Yeah. So and in your article here, you do talk about Karens and just and police dogs and water hoses and just like some of these other threats. Do you want to talk any more about that?
Yeah, well, to me, a Karen, it's typically a white woman who just seems to be entitled. So the example that I used in the article was of someone who called the police on a group of Black people that were having a barbecue at a park. I know of other examples where, there was a child who was selling water on her apartment doorstep, and someone called the police on her for selling water bottles. So just things that, Black people police have been called on Black people as Black people are just going about living their everyday lives.
Sure.
Going into apartment buildings that the people that see you pass don't realize you live there. So, let me call the police to make sure that they come and get you out of here.
Yeah. Yep.
And these situations happen all the time. And like you said, now, thanks to cell phones, other people and social media, other people are seeing these things, whereas they've been happening for years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, Jennifer, what is it like raising a young Black male right now?
I definitely worry about him when I'm not with him. The example I give in the story is in my article is that if he were to go out and, do a prank like toilet papering a house and he was with his friends, whereas we live in a pretty well-off white area, a suburb of Dallas. If he were with them, if he were with friends and they were all doing something, would he be the only one that would be, caught or accused of doing something? You just, I think about those things.
Yeah.
And another thing, I'm just careful about the things that we do. For example, my son's 13. He plays sports and he loves them, but it was somewhat deliberate on my part that he start playing sports because I thought it would be a great way for him to get to know people and specifically to know parents.
Mm-hmm.
So that if he were ever in a situation where something, um, negative happened,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
there would be some adults that would know who he is.
Right.
So, I mean, he plays baseball, he plays basketball, he runs track, he's played soccer in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and people know who he is in our town because he's been, quite involved in these sports. So a lot of dads know him, a lot of moms know him,
Right.
and I think that's a great thing for him because
Yeah.
as Black children, kind of reach those teenage years, they're not thought to be so cute anymore. They're seen
Mm-hmm.
as threatening by a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to do whatever I can to mitigate that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And so they can be a character witness and they know who he is. And, and I think then it also becomes personal, right? Because when they hear about people being treated unfairly or, disrespected, and they can think of people in their own lives who they know and love. And I think that
Right.
it actually enables more allyship because you have a person, it's personal, right? I think
Right.
sometimes when it's
Exactly.
abstract, even though it's horrifying, it seems like distant. But I think when it's one of your own friends and your neighbors, right, that's different. So I think that's thank you for sharing that, because I did, when I was reading through your article and just knowing you personally, I thought, what is that like and what does that feel like? And I remember you telling me about your mom, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about her. Just when you talked about being in school, it made me think of her
Yeah.
story.
So yeah, I can talk about my mom as well. So she has a interesting story. My mom is 70 years old, but in her junior year of high school in 1964, she was given the opportunity to start going to a new school. She grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and at the time she was attending a school called Cancel Training High School, which was the school for Black students in the area that she lived in. Her parents never thought that she was getting that great of an education. And so when the opportunity arose for her to go to the nearby kind of white high school, Robert E. Lee, she decided to take that chance. So back in 1955, there was a court case called Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. And it was basically people fighting for the right for schools to be integrated. And the court ruled that segregation was unconstitutional because before then, everything was separate but equal. So the idea was that you could have a separate school, but your education would be equal. But that's not what happened. And actually, that's not what's happening today, because most schools, the funding that they receive is based upon the neighborhoods they live in and the property taxes and everything. But anyway, she decided that she was going to go to this high school, Robert E. Lee, and she showed up her first day of her junior year, not realizing that she was the only Black student that decided to go there. So it was definitely an interesting situation.
Mm-hmm.
She did have some close friends who, surrounded her and did their best to protect her.
Yeah.
I mean, even teachers, she told me that teachers would walk her from class to class to make sure that she was protected.
Mm.
And, she told me that her friends would ask her, why don't you come to a football game with us? And she always declined.
Yeah.
And she decided to go to one. And when she got there, she said she was terrified because she realized there was just this sea of white people. She was the only Black person. Again, this is 1964.
Right. Not that long ago.
And she said she just didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
And one thing I left out that I think is important. So it became unconstitutional for schools to be segregated in 1955. It took 9 years for Alabama to act on that and to start to desegregate schools.
Wow.
So I think what was written was that, what is it, they had to work with all deliberate haste or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was 9 years for them.
Oh my
So,
goodness. Wow. How
yeah.
courageous.
Yeah.
Do you
Robert E.
know?
Lee High School with a
Or-
mural of Robert E. Lee
Yeah.
in the gym, riding a horse with a Confederate flag. And
Sure.
to this day, the school is still named Robert E. Lee High School.
Okay.
And now the neighborhood is mostly Black, but they've refused to change the name thus far.
Yeah. Well, that progress is happening too. So let's keep our eye on that school. But I appreciate you sharing that story because first of all, it was not very long ago. Secondly, her courage and bravery is something that is inspirational for us to just be willing to be the only one. I mean, I hear this a lot from different populations. Like I'm the only person in the room, like myself, and that's a really lonely place to be. Which is,
Right.
I'd love to talk more about the Cognizant work on belonging
Can
at
we
some.
talk a bit more about systemic racism?
Yes. I was just going to segue to that because I think that's a really important distinction to make and an understanding to share.
Sure. Yeah. So to me, systemic racism, it's also called institutional racism or structural racism, but it's just the fact that racism is really embedded in procedures. It's embedded in organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean that people are specifically racist, but it's just that things are so embedded in the culture
Mm-hmm.
that that's what systemic racism is.
Yeah.
So it it affects everything from criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power. We already talked about education, so it just affects so many things.
Yeah. You'd shared this definition with me that I think is
Yes.
really helpful. Let me pull this up so I can read this too.
Yeah.
Here it is. Okay, it says systemic racism, a form of racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization. This complex interaction of culture, policies, and institutions can lead to discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other issues, also known as institutional or structural racism.
Right.
Yeah. So I think, having a shared definition and understanding of what that is. And I think it helps when you hear people say something like the system's broken.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know is that it's not broken. It was designed that way. It needs to
Exactly.
be recreated.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I can give an example of that. So I know most people have heard of the GI Bill.
Mm-hmm.
So people went
Yeah.
off to war, fought in World War II. They came back. There was this GI Bill that was created to give veterans access to education and access to housing.
Mm-hmm.
So on paper, it looks like it worked for everyone, but it didn't work quite as well for Black veterans.
Yeah.
So for instance, in terms of housing, if a Black veteran were to find a home that they wanted to purchase, they would try to get a bank loan, and the bank would say, oh, that house is in a neighborhood that we don't provide loans to. There was a process known as redlining,
Yeah.
where, bankers would basically look at maps and they would draw red lines around areas that they, felt were more likely to default on their loans. So they wouldn't give loans to those areas. And those areas typically seem to be like Black neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one instance. And then, in addition to that, there were definitely neighborhoods that Black people could not live in at the time.
Yeah.
And then in terms of education, many white veterans were able to go to college, but it wasn't as easy for the Black veterans. First of all, many of them had come from schools that weren't as good. I kind of talked about the school that my mom had gone to before she moved to this new school.
Mm-hmm.
They had gone to these public schools for Black students that weren't as good as some of the other schools. So
Mm-hmm.
even if they were able to get into college, they may not have been prepared to study. And lots of colleges just weren't accepting Black people at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely colleges in the South, but even colleges in the North.
Yeah.
So they were left out of that too. So while on paper, you would think that the GI Bill thing helped everyone, it didn't really help the Black community that much. And we see remnants of that today, just definitely in terms of housing. The housing rate is so much lower. Housing ownership rate is so much lower for Black people than it is for, others.
Yeah. And I bet you with the wealth disparity that for some going to college would be a luxury, but they needed to go to work.
Exactly. That
Right?
too. That
Yeah.
too. Yeah. So some people were not even able to go to college because they definitely needed to work.
Yeah. So you can see how this has a big, long ripple effect.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so you work for an organization, Cognizant, who really takes this and all diversity and inclusion very seriously and commits a lot of resource, time, and talent towards, finding solutions, bringing people together. So can you tell us a little bit about what Cognizant is doing in diversity and inclusion in totality, which you're in part responsible for, and on this matter specifically?
Yeah. So my role specifically is looking at, the things happening inside Cognizant related to diversity and inclusion and really promoting them externally. So it's doing things like articles like mine. I'm not the one that's usually writing them, but I'm usually helping other people, write and publish articles, making sure they get on social media. Um, it's doing client events outside of COVID. All of those are on hold for now, or moving into the virtual space.
Sure.
But again, it's really bringing people together to help them have conversations around diversity and inclusion and the importance of it. And we really find that more and more of our clients are valuing this, and they want to know what we're doing and see if there are ways that we can partner. One of the things that we most recently did is we embarked on some research around belonging. We partnered with Microsoft and an organization called Tammy Erickson and Associates, who actually helped us in terms of writing the research. But the research was conducted in late 2019 and it's published in March of this year. It's available on our website, and I'll share that so everyone can access it if they're interested.
For sure.
We surveyed more than 10,000 people around the world. So, different genders, different ages, different job roles, whether they're in management or less senior level. And we really think this research has become even more important in, dealing with COVID-19, because so many people are home. And how do you especially help people feel like they belong when they aren't able to go into an office and see people face to face?
Sure.
But we found that there are really kind of 6 things around belonging. And let's see, I have a slide on it if you want to pull it up.
Yeah.
There are, yes. So first of all, belonging is a universal human need. And we found that, around the world, people felt that belonging was a universal need. 92% of the people that we surveyed agreed with that.
Unbelievable.
And
wow.
Really, it's just the idea that you feel like you're appreciated for who you are and what you can contribute.
Yeah.
Another of the 6 is workplace belonging is not a fuzzy concept. It's concrete. And basically what this means is we found that there are 4 things people look for when they, determine whether or not they feel like they belong.
Yeah.
It's, do you feel welcome? Do you feel valued? Do you feel included? And do you feel connected? So that was the second.
Yeah.
The third one is that some people felt that belonging is more important than pay. So of the people we surveyed, 62% of them agreed with this. And when you looked at the younger people we surveyed, so Gen X and Gen Y, their numbers were, in some cases, even above 70%. Wow. They really just want to feel like they belong.
Yeah.
We also found that belonging is tied to performance. So if you feel like you belong to an organization, your motivation is increased, you're more committed, you're more prideful, and your well-being, whether it's emotional or physical, increases, and you're more engaging when it comes to doing your work.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And altogether, these things help to increase innovation and productivity. We also found that no matter the size of the organization you belong to, belonging is important. So, from people that were, at organizations with less than 50 people to people at organizations greater than with more than 5,000 people, everyone wanted to feel like they belong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's incredible. Wow.
And then lastly, we found that,
Oops.
even though we're now in a very digital world, belonging really starts with face-to-face interaction.
Mm-hmm.
So, being face-to-face to someone is really important. So especially in times like this, when many of us are not able to meet up face-to-face, technology becomes really important.
Yes. Yeah. When it says carbon-based.
Yeah, carbon-based, that just means face-to-face,
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought.
in person.
Yeah. And so using video technology, albeit not as great as me being able to hug you right now, which I would love to do, is better than just us texting each other or having a phone call, right?
Well, I mean, there were some people that loved, actually, I think telephone was the highest rated in our
Oh,
survey.
really?
But it's just technology in general. I mean, it's
Okay.
everything from using things like, um, at Cognizant, we have Yammer, which is an internal chat tool.
Sure.
So Yammer or
Like
Microsoft
Slack.
Teams,
Yeah.
or, it might be Skype,
Mm-hmm.
even something like Facebook or Instagram. They're just ways to interact with people using technology. But,
Yeah.
the telephone as well, telephone or video.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, thank you for sharing that research with us and just the, making the case, the really substantive business case for belonging and why it matters. And just, that there are actually bottom line benefits to it too might help
Definitely.
those non-believers give it a whirl or make it more important. And then, thinking about how important it is to the millennials is also a consideration, and the next generation about recruitment and talent
Right.
retention, as long as well as attribute, collecting talent, gaining talent.
Yes.
So what are some of the things that Cognizant has been doing in light of the current events?
Yeah, well, I would say the first thing that happened, when I mentioned starting to write my article, there were definitely some communications that came from our leadership where, violence was condemned and it was really encouraged to stand up for what's right. So from our CEO, Brian Humphreys, and our Chief People Officer, Becky Schmidt, they both sent out, letters internally, and I think Brian's was shared externally as well.
Yes.
Since then, there have been a host of other things that have happened, and many of them are ongoing. Our Chief People Officer has recently pulled a diversity council together. So we meet regularly to discuss a host of topics related to diversity. So I think that's a great initiative, and we'll see some great things out of that.
Good.
One of our training organizations created a toolkit for managers so they could have discussions with their teams around everything that's going on now.
Yeah.
And it's called Standing Up for What's Right, building on the message that our CEO sent out. And, really, it's just been a good way for managers to meet with their teams, talk through what's going on, but also provide some resources. So there was a page created on the intranet that has articles and videos that people can go and learn more information, and books are recommended. But the whole idea is to just get educated about what's going on, so you can speak intelligently and be the best ally that you can. We have a foundation in the U.S. They have committed to donate $5 million to organizations focused on communities of color. And I'm excited about that one, and we'll be able to kind of sit in on some of the meetings they're having to help determine some of those organizations. And then for the first time this year, Cognizant celebrated Juneteenth as a holiday. And for those that aren't familiar with Juneteenth, it's June 19th, and it's the day that slaves who lived in Texas learned that they were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. But it came more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. I mean, it took that long because of the communication systems at that time.
Okay.
And so me living in Texas, I've
Yeah.
known about this day for quite some time, but for the first time this year, it seemed to, almost be celebrated as a national holiday that many people learned about.
Yeah.
So Cognizant, gave the day off to their associates in the US, and everyone was encouraged again to really educate themselves and learn about what's going on.
Hmm.
And we were even given access to some movies, so we could learn more. One was um, Hidden Figures, which is the
Ah,
movie that features Black women who worked for NASA in the 50s and 60s.
yeah.
Another was Red Tails, which is about the Tuskegee Airmen, which is um, a well-known group of fighter pilots from World War II. They're all Black men from Tuskegee. I think it was called Tuskegee Institute at the time. It's a college in, I believe, Tennessee. It's now called
Wow.
Tuskegee University.
Yeah.
Um, and lastly, the third movie that it was encouraged that we watch is The Hate U Give, which is a fictional movie, but it's about a teenage Black girl who is driving with her friends or
Hmm.
riding in a car with a friend, and they get pulled over by the police, and unfortunately he's killed. And it's just kind of her dealing with the aftermath of that.
Yeah.
But Juneteenth, it wasn't a day of just take off and have fun. It was really encouraged to take some time to educate yourself so you can learn
Hmm.
about what's going on and become a better ally.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're just celebrating NASA today for renaming their
Yes,
headquarters after Mary W. Jackson.
yes, I saw
Yeah,
that.
yeah, that's so exciting. So all of these things are steps in the right direction, and I think that it's helpful. So speaking of steps in the right direction, I would really love your advice and counsel, coaching on how to be an ally.
Sure. So yeah, these are the tips that I listed in my article, but I'll
Hmm.
just talk through them.
Yeah.
First, I think it's really important to be compassionate at this time because especially a lot of Black people are hurting.
Hmm.
Um, but it's being compassionate, listening, learning, talking to your friends and colleagues, all of them. So talk to your Black friends and colleagues, ask them if they're okay. And I can tell you that um, some people may not want to talk, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
Just give them time.
Right.
Um, but you also need to talk to your non-Black friends and colleagues and hear their point of view. And if they're not allies, see if you can help to get them to become allies.
Hmm.
I also think it's really important to talk to your children so they understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And some people may think that, oh, racism is a scary thing and I don't want to introduce it to my children, but I
Hmm.
mean, it happens. I mean, as a
Yeah.
Black parent, I mean, I don't have the option to not discuss it. It's
Right.
a regular conversation that I have with my son and that my parents had with me.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
I just think it's something that you talk to people about it, and that's how
Sure.
things start to get better and change.
That's right. Yeah, you have a click through in your article to talking to children about racism and the statistics about how early uh, children start to, you know, recognize racism. So the earlier you can talk about it, the more of an advocate or an ally everyone can be because you've already addressed the issue and you've made them aware. Because I remember
Right.
watching The Help with my kids when they were really young, and they like we had to pause it at one point because they were just so confused. Like, why does she have to go to the bathroom in the other? Like there was no
Yep.
acknowledgement. Like I don't get it. And so we had to have that conversation. And they have African American friends, so they were also concerned, and they were like, "Do they have to?" And I said, "This is an ongoing problem in our country." So I think having read your article, I thought, oh, I missed a chance. But for anyone on the call who's got young children, get in there early. But when
Yes.
your point here is about compassion and listening, and can you just give me a couple quick tips on what not to say? Because I do think that sometimes people
Hmm.
go into these conversations with great intentions, but they don't always go so well. So I just
Well,
would love to give some people a little bit of a tip.
I guess one thing you shouldn't say is if you're not Black, I don't think you should say I understand because I don't think you can understand.
Right.
Um, I know that you're trying to understand, but I think, that's just the time, um, to kind of stand back and listen.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing, and actually something we've been working on an article around this is gaslighting.
Yep.
And if, someone says something that you don't agree with, find a way to discuss it in a way that, you're not gaslighting the person, not making them feel like they're stupid
Mm-hmm.
or ignorant, but,
Yeah.
a way that you can find some common ground and actually have a discussion where you're able to, kind of move things forward.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's really great advice. And I think, really viewing it as an opportunity to learn,
Yes,
not defend or object or, and
exactly.
it just learn, and I kind of feel like if you're not ready to do that, then maybe don't ask, right? Until you're
Right.
ready, because I think,
Yeah.
it's not the time for anybody to make someone else wrong or disagree. I think
Right.
it's time to be open and educated.
And I would add that, what, that I'm going to get into like some specific like resources, but
Great.
I think sometimes before you have these conversations, take the time to educate yourself,
Right.
and don't expect the Black people that you know to educate you.
Mm-hmm.
You need to take some time out yourself and, read some articles. There are tons of resources online that will tell you like some articles to read, books to
Yes.
read,
Yes.
and you don't really have to reach out to your Black friends for that
Mm-hmm.
information.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the resources
Yeah.
are there. You just have to take the time to look at them.
Right. And the good news is that books like How to Be an Anti-Racist and White Fragility have been sold out for
Yes.
weeks now. So that
Yeah.
says to me that many people are seeking the knowledge, and that's a good sign.
True.
Yeah. So then you say here too about if you see prejudice or mistreatment, call it out.
Yes. Yeah. So that's just if you see something that's not right, call people on it.
Yeah.
And I also added, you might need to record it. So, the example we gave about Central Park is
Yeah.
that's a great example.
Mm-hmm.
And I was speaking to you earlier, and I told of how a Hispanic man was stenciling Black Lives Matter on his doorstep,
Yeah.
and a white couple walking by stopped him and said, why are you doing this here? You don't live here. And he actually did live there,
Yeah.
but he recorded the whole interaction because he didn't know what they were going to do. They were threatening to call the police on him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but just things like that. It
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they've been happening for years, and I think Black people have been saying it's been happening for years, and I don't think we were believed.
Mm-hmm.
Now that we have cell phones with cameras,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more believable. And again, I think social media is immensely important because people are able to post these things and they go viral.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's really great.
The other thing related to this is even if you're seeing something, and there may not be a Black person there, someone tells a racist joke,
Mm-hmm.
um, someone says something that's off color, you should call
Mm-hmm.
that out too.
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Yes.
Even if there's no one there that it specifically offends, you need to call those things out too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important in all bystander situations to not just brush it off and let it go, but to use it as an opportunity to educate, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Lonnie's saying, listen and learn.
Yes.
Yes. And for those of you who have questions for Jennifer, please put them in the comment section or in the chat, and we will get to those. So that's really important. What are some other ways that people could be allies?
So you can definitely seek out organizations and, volunteer with them or make donations. So in my article, I called out a few, like, of course, there is Black Lives Matter.
Sure.
There's an organization called Color of Change,
Yes.
which is an online racial justice organization. They say they have more than 1.7 million members, but they're one of the groups behind the current boycott of Facebook.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they do is they encourage people to boycott brands until, they kind of get the action they want from those brands. Another organization is the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And it was created in 1909. So it's more than 100 years old. And they have more than 2 million members. They also have a sister organization, which I think is wonderful. It's the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So they're specifically focused on fighting for racial justice. So those are just a few, but you can look organizations up online. You can find local organizations to volunteer with or to donate to. I think all of those help.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic advice. And there's been more resources shared in the past month than I've ever seen. And I think that's a great thing. So the resources are out there. You just have to be willing to look for them and then find one that you wanted to get engaged with and, volunteer your time, get involved, learn about what they stand for, donate, all of those things. It's such a great idea. Other ways that people can get involved is with like affinity groups or ERGs. And I know not everybody knows what an ERG is, but tell us a little bit more about how to get involved with groups.
An ERG is an employee resource group. At Cognizant, we have affinity groups, but basically they are groups of, people who have decided to come together to support each other. At Cognizant, in addition to supporting each other, we focus on things like recruiting and training, and networking. But we have a group specifically for our African American and Latinx colleagues. It's called our African American and Latinx group. But I think that's a great way to get involved. So, find those organizations in your company and get involved with them. They always welcome allies.
Absolutely. And I think it's so important to work when you work for a company like Cognizant to get involved with groups with whom you don't naturally affiliate, right? So like if you are a heterosexual person and you are a member of the LGBTQ plus group, or you're a non-Black professional and you join this group, like I think that's a great way to not only expand your network, which is a good thing to do, but also to expand your awareness and, your way in which you can be an ally, because we don't know until we get physically involved how we can actually help.
It's very true. Yeah. The African American and Latinx group at Cognizant, since George Floyd's murder, we've been having these open forum calls, every week actually, because people were hurting and just wanted to get together and talk about what's going on. And they've been open to, like I said, the people who are a part of the African American group, but also allies. And it's been a good forum for people to share and listen and learn.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You've got so many great suggestions here.
Yeah, another one, related to the workplace is to mentor and sponsor Black colleagues.
Yes.
So,
from a mountaintop, Jennifer.
So yeah, definitely mentor, sponsor, and I added civic organizations. So I'll pulled up this magazine. I live in Dallas.
Yeah.
And this is DCEO magazine, which is basically our magazine about business in the city. Yeah. And they recently featured 3 Black women who are taking over 3 large civic organizations in Dallas. One woman will become the president of the Junior League next year. Yeah. Another one is the board chair of our Texas Women's Foundation. And the third is this leader of an organization called the Dallas Assembly. But, not just at work, if you're volunteering, if you're involved in civic organizations, you should mentor and sponsor people there too. I mean, and that's how these women got involved.
That's
You
it.
know, they had their jobs, but they're also involved in these other organizations.
Yeah,
And, you know, it's helped them reach leadership positions there.
that's fantastic. And that's something everyone can do. And what about like, you mentioned this a little bit earlier before about like buying and endorsing, similar to that cover story and those people who are being highlighted in that article, to buy from Black owned businesses and to support
Yeah.
Black owned businesses. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's just the way we spoke about economic disparities
Yep.
earlier, or we touched on it a bit. And that's one way that you can, you know, help to change that.
Mm-hmm.
I've recently found lists of Black-owned businesses online. There are even apps on the Apple Store that are devoted to Black-owned businesses. So
That's
you
good
can
to know.
search.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can search different things, whether it's art or food or clothing or, you know,
Yeah.
skincare.
Sure.
And I think it's just you know, that's another way that you can support the community. So whether it's a business that's Black owned, or whether it's, you know, supporting the creators
Right.
of, you know, art or authors,
Mm-hmm.
or, you know, a fashion designer,
Yes.
just working, spending your dollars in
Mm-hmm.
the Black community.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, most recently I was looking for a face mask, shocking. And I did find this designer, a Black owned business, and she'd made all kinds of clothing, and she made face masks, which of course were gorgeous. They were like silk and beautiful, but they were all back ordered. I think like because
Mm,
people got, but then I did
but
find
that's
them
positive.
at Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. They have one that says justice that I really liked, and they have a couple of other ones. But
Nice.
I think that's a good way to think. I mean, I remember recently just like looking through like, well, who do I pay money to, and what are my choices, and how can I be more thoughtful and deliberate about,
Right.
investing in and supporting Black owned businesses. That's
So
awesome.
one thing I want to add is I have seen people are definitely beginning to support Black businesses, which is great, but some people are getting frustrated because they're sold out, or maybe it's taking a long time for shipping. So I
Mm-hmm.
just want everyone to be aware that some of these businesses are quite small and we still want to support them, but just
Yeah.
give them a bit of grace as they kind of figure out how to deal with all of this new demand that they have.
Right. Right. And like really, I think it's important to remember in a couple of months that will be back in stock.
Yes.
But she's got so many other really great things. I'll send you the link to her store. So we have
Awesome.
a question here from Emmanuel.
I know
Oh,
Emmanuel.
you do? Okay. So he says, how do you think we can keep the momentum going and avoid performance initiatives in favor of real inclusion?
Emmanuel, you had to give me a hard question.
He's like, I know she can handle anything. I'm gonna throw this her way. Yeah. What's your thought on that one?
You know what? I think it's really just all about keeping the dialogue going.
Hmm.
So, you know, I mentioned, like, for instance, we now have this diversity council at Cognizant. So it isn't a one-time thing. And, you know, we'll probably be meeting at least once a month. And I'm sure we'll have some teams that are a part of that group that are meeting more frequently than that. But I think that's what it's going to take. I think it's, you know, continual education and, you know, just continuing to keep things top of mind. So although, you know, I mentioned at Cognizant, we put out this toolkit a couple of weeks ago. We're going to have to put something out every few weeks, you know, whether it's a new article or whether it's you know, a new presentation that talks about, you know, how things have changed since a month ago. We've
Hmm.
just got to make sure that this stays top of mind.
Yeah. And I think that Cognizant is one of those organizations that leads the way related to a lot of things. But one of them is that you measure what matters, right? And I know that you go to these maker conferences each year and you make a
Right.
declaration of like, we will, and you come up
Yes.
with some huge goal. And
Yes.
historically, you've been successful in reaching that goal. So I
We
think
have.
this is likely going to be one of those big,
Definitely.
audacious goals that you set, right?
Yes. Yeah. Maybe at Makers next year, we make a goal related to this.
Mhm.
We'll see.
Right, because that's how I think real change happens is that you put a stake in the ground and you say, here's what our metric looks like right now. we're making this commitment, and we're going to hold ourselves accountable, because then I think it really, takes off and galvanizes people. So we've got, he says,
Thanks,
you
Emmanuel.
inspire me. Thank you so much for your kindness and openness, and keep promoting a better place for all. Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
yes, yes.
And my mom commented too.
Yes, I wanted to share hers too.
And
What is she?
Karen. So those are three of my friends who are on.
Yes.
Thank them for joining.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you for being here. That's great. All right, keep the questions coming if you guys have additional questions. So while we're waiting for more questions, we've got 5 minutes left, and I want to hear about some resources.
Yes. So I came up with a list of resources that I think people can go to learn more.
Yeah.
First off, I think you should try to go to museums if you can. And I don't even think I discussed this one with you, but I thought about it last night. So I know here in Dallas, we have an African American museum that's a great resource with lots of exhibits, art, but also cultural based exhibits. If you live near Washington, D.C., you should definitely go to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. It is an awesome museum that has like 3 or 4 floors. The first floor is totally devoted to slavery, so you can learn more than you would ever want to know about slavery. Yeah. The second floor focuses on the civil rights movement. You can actually see Emmett Till's grave. Sorry, Emmett Till's casket, not his grave. Okay. Wow. And it's just it's a great museum to learn where you can learn a lot. And then they've even got, information about sports figures, artists, musicians, so it gets less somber. Yes. But that's a great museum. Some of the other things that I recommended, TV. I love TV. So people who are on the phone that know me know that I love TV. I've called out, some of the shows that I like. I think it's really good to, learn about Black culture. So there are 3 shows that I think are great just to kind of see Black culture. One is Blackish, and they actually do a lot of episodes where they talk about, kind of historical topics. They did an episode specifically around Juneteenth. So that's a great show to watch. Yeah. Another one is Insecure, which is about young Black women in LA just living their life and, dealing with friendships, dealing with dating. Yeah. And then the third show that I called out was Dear White People, which is about some Black students that attend a majority white college and just their experience there. So I think those are kind of good ways to kind of immerse yourself in Black culture. And I think what I especially like about those shows is they show so many different types of Black people, and you realize that we're not monolithic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
These movies are great too.
Yeah. We only have a couple more minutes. So one thing that I really want to call out on that slide is a documentary called Eyes on the Prize, which I remember watching when I was in high school, and it told me more than I ever wanted to know about the civil rights movement. I mean, it is long. It's 14 episodes. If you watch all of it, it goes from like 1954 to 1985. Wow. But it's a great, great documentary, and I can provide a link so you can watch it for free. It's available online.
Okay. We'll put that in our follow-up notes.
Yeah. And then I also had Do the Right Thing, which is a Spike Lee movie that is still relevant today, even though it was, done in the 90s, and 13th by Ava DuVernay, which is a really great documentary. It's kind of depressing, but it's really good and informative. And it talks about how essentially the 13th Amendment did away with slavery. However, she really sees the 13th Amendment as kind of changing slavery into jail in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like prison became the slavery for Black people.
It's astounding. I've watched that twice and I need to watch it again. There's so much content in there. And Bryan Stevenson, who a lot of people know from Just Mercy, he's the actual Bryan Stevenson is in there. That's such an incredible and very important documentary is what I would describe that as, right?
Yes, definitely.
And she also created When They See Us, on
Yes, that's a
Netflix,
great
which
one
is
too.
as hard as it is to watch, something that I think everyone must watch. Because then
I
you talk
agree.
about the not monolithic, and the really interesting perspective of what is it like to be the families of these individuals who are wrongfully incarcerated, and just what it did to their lives. And for those who watch When They See Us, there's a Oprah Winfrey show that was done after all of this was created. Do not watch it until after you watch every episode, but it's a great way to pull it all together and to see like what's happening in their lives right now. Just very eye-opening. So a couple of books, and then there are some questions. Is
Okay.
it okay
Yeah,
if we run over a couple
sure.
minutes?
I can keep
Okay.
going.
Okay. So here
So
are some books.
yeah, so there are three podcasts.
Oh, podcast.
1619 is a podcast that's all about slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And it's based on a New York Times report that came out earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really good one. And then let's see, Code Switch is another podcast. It's produced by NPR, and their tagline is "Race in Your Face."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about race.
Right.
And then the other one that I've listed there is Still Processing. It's a podcast that's also from New York Times that features a man and a woman. The woman attended my college, the University of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And they really talk about culture, movies, TV, music, but race always seems to find its way in there as well. So those are three good podcasts.
Great. Thank
And
you.
then I've listed a couple articles and books. So you want to talk about race and how to be an anti-racist. And so we'll send these out so everyone can access them if they'd like to.
Great.
I see the question from my friend Karen.
Yes. Yeah. We'll put it
See,
up here.
technology's role in racial equality. Yeah, I guess what I would say, and Karen knows this because we worked on events. We worked on an event, I guess it's been a year ago now, nearly a year ago, where we had a panel that was all around this. And, really it's just, you've got to have different people, people of different ethnicities, people, different genders, people that think differently, participate so that you're mitigating as much bias as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that whatever products or solutions that you're ending up with are relevant to the greatest number of people. Yeah. And, studies also show us that the more diverse teams are, the more successful teams are. Diverse teams are better at decision making. Companies that are more diverse have better bottom lines. Their profits are higher. So, diversity is good for the bottom dollar.
Yeah. Right. And it's just good in general. So I think it's not only bottom line benefits, it's just human benefits. And I think that's what leadership is, right? Leadership is creating a space where people can grow and develop and thrive. And how better to do that than with a nice bouquet of variety and diversity. And so we've got a couple of shout outs here. Holly
Thanks,
said,
Holly
awesome
and Karen.
job. Oh, and Maureen,
And
who's a
Maureen,
new friend of
all my
mine.
friends who came out
Yes.
to support me. Thank you.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks for being on.
Sure. Thanks for having me. And I hope it was informative.
Oh, yes. It was so informative. And we'll send everybody the follow-up notes so that you can take this and run with it. Please share with others to spread the word. And I so appreciate you sharing your wisdom and insights with us, Jennifer. And you should keep writing those articles. I know that you're great at publishing other people's great work, but I'm telling you, this was awesome.
Thank you.
You've got
Thank you. I
talent.
enjoyed it. I'll have to, if another topic inspires me, I will definitely write.
Good. Good. All right. Well, we'll see everybody soon. Go out there and be an ally and be the change.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.